NelsonJoypad.com bring you another original. It's fucking great.
At Mouse and Joypad, we realise that there's more to the gaming industry than the big AAA titles and the conferences that we're likely to see at E3. There's a lot of successful developers that don't get the exposure that they deserve. I was lucky enough to speak with Asymmetric in regards to their upcoming title, West of Loathing. I was speaking with Zach Johnson, creative director for the project, and Kevin Simmons, a producer for the game. Zach tells us about the game in his own words.
Yeah, it's a single-player, sort of a hybrid adventure game RPG. It's based in the same sort of fictional universe as Kingdom of Loathing, which is our long-running web-based MMO that I made in 2003, and that Kevin and I and a few other people have continued to work on since then.
Tell us about Kingdom of Loathing and what you've maybe taken from that and transferred over to the new game.
Yeah, so essentially KOL is, it's like, if you are familiar with the sort of games that existed on BBSs in the 90s, it's lightly multiplayer. You're more or less just going through a bunch of Oregon Trail-ish gameplay, but with sort of turn-based combat and stuff. And you are in a world with a bunch of other players, but you don't typically directly interact with them. There are economic aspects to it, and
we joke that it's a massively single-player game.
Yeah. There are social things going on, and there are some multiplayer gameplay aspects, but by and large, it's just a sort of a thing where you log in and you play your turns, and maybe you talk to some other people in the chat, and maybe you sell them some items, and then you just go on. And it's got a sort of a central loop where you play through a series of quests, and then you start over with a little bit of increase in power, kind of a perpetual new game plus thing. And we have been adding content to it and refining it and balancing it and adding systems and just adding everything to it for 13 years. And it's been a team of up to 6 or 7 of us at times. So while it is a silly looking stick figure game, there is a lot going on. If you kind of dig down into it, there's a pretty vibrant competitive scene in it too, which is a thing that we've always strived to support. And I guess the thing that we kind of want to do with West of Loathing is more in contrast with that than it is influenced by it, because we've felt like, boy, wouldn't it be great to just make a game that we could make and then be done with it and then sell to people, as opposed to another service that we would have to provide for a decade and a half. And so we're using a lot of the same sensibilities. And, it's funny. The art is the same kind of stick figure and line drawing stuff that I've always done, but it's presented in a 3D space, kind of diorama style. Paper Mario has kind of been our touchstone on the aesthetic of it. It's 2D art in a 3D space. Everything is animated, and it's just more of a real video game than at least it looks like more of a real video game than Kingdom of Loathing looks like.
You control a single avatar that walks around a space, and you can use, if you're on a computer, you can use WASD to navigate and that kind of thing.
Whereas KOL is much more like just a series of menus that you click through,
like a choose your own adventure kind of situation.
Whereas you had quite a long post support with Kingdom of Loathing, you're saying that West of Loathing is going to be more of the standard issue of a game where you get the game and then move on.
Yeah, correct.
Is there anything you can tell us about the plot or the storyline that we're going to see in West of Loathing?
So something that I've always wanted out of a single-player RPG is a storyline where you weren't necessarily trying to save the world. I've always said that the perfect game for me would be like a Bethesda RPG without a main quest line, and I don't think that you could really get away with that. But essentially, you're a person who goes west to sort of seek your fortune, and the main thing that you're trying to accomplish is to help the Manifest Destiny Railroad Company run the last bit of their track from Topeka to Frisco. The main quest line of the game is in just a few steps. There's a lot of different ways to approach it, a lot of different solutions to it, and almost all of what you're going to be doing is just sort of side quest stuff and exploring spaces and exploring systems and just kind of poking around, reading jokes, interacting with goofy things in the world.
Solving puzzles, getting into random scraps with goblins and that kind of thing.
Okay, so instead of the grand quest where you become the world-saving hero, it's a lot more in tune with, well, I suppose the Wild West, really.
Yeah, I think of you as a minor character. I've always felt like it was really silly in, a Skyrim or whatever, that you end up being the president of wizards and the president of thieves and the president of fighters and the president of assassins and all of that stuff. And so I just, I don't want a game where you go to all these towns and just become the sheriff of every town in succession. The character is more of a player surrogate, just poking around.
And in that experience, in that journey, do you have the option to maybe be a bad guy from time to time?
Yeah, in the prologue, there's a few decisions that you can make that will either establish your character as, the way the sort of perks are systemically named now is you can either be ruthless or honorable, depending on the way that you approach the first few situations that you end up with other with sort of bad guy NPCs. And we plan on having the encounters and a lot of the later content in the game respond to that reputation that you've established. The tone is still pretty silly, so we're not going to get too dark with it. It's more like the sort of how much of a jerk do we want the player to be, and how sarcastically do we want the other NPCs to respond to them?
You mentioned the reputation. Does that grow with you as you play the game, or is that something that's set out in the first section of the prologue?
The way that we'll have to see as it develops, but the way that the way that I would like for it to work is you just kind of set it. You just sort of pick whether you are a sort of really good guy or a really bad guy in the beginning, and then it doesn't. I don't want it to just fundamentally block off sections of the game, but I think that is enough of a pivot point in the beginning that it can just adjust the flavor of things. I mean, we might give some opportunity for redemption, but I think that would just be a toggle from bad guy to not bad guy. So you make some decisions in the prologue. You have to buy a horse to get out of the first town, and then you have to pick a sort of a partner to come with you. And there are 4 of each of those, and what the horse does is it determines the kind of type of random encounters that you get, and the partner has various skills where they'll help you in combat and stuff, but also can do things out in the world. Those choices will change the way that you approach certain puzzles, certain encounters in the world, and so my intent is for it to be pretty replayable. Like, what I'm shooting for, and I worry that we're going to accidentally just end up with it longer than this, but what I'm shooting for is like a 4 or 5 hour playthrough if you're just kind of trying to make progress, and then for you to go back and do it again, having made some different choices in the prologue. And so I think that just initial, like, do I want to be a good guy? Do I want to be a bad guy? Is probably sufficient, and we don't need a bunch of like different factions that you have to maintain specific reputations with and stuff like that.
It's kind of a white hat, black hat scenario.
A little bit, yeah.
There are, in addition, 3 different character classes to choose from. So there's a bunch of different playable options beyond just sort of the reputation system. And those will have completely different skill sets and will open up different sort of possibilities out in the world as well.
Is there anything you can tell us about the different character classes?
So they are loosely based on the same sort of division that we have in Kingdom of Loathing. We have sort of 3 character statistics in Kingdom of Loathing that sort of drive the character classes in that game. And we have muscle, mysticality, and moxie as our sort of, in sort of D&D terms, that'd be sort of strength, intelligence, and charisma, probably. And so our muscle class is the cow puncher, where your whole shtick is that you fight cows, which in our mythos are actually a demonic invading force. And then the mysticality class, the spell class, is the bean slinger. In Kingdom of Loathing, a lot of the magic revolves around cooking and food and pasta and that kind of thing. So the bean slinger is the magic user. And then the Moxie class in West of Loathing is the snake oiler. They're the ones that'll be skilled with guns and cheating people out of things verbally.
I've got to admit, I did see in the reveal trailer the cow puncher
Yes.
tab, and I was going to ask about that, if it was a trait or if it was a character. I love the idea of being a cow puncher. I don't know why.
Yeah, so does everybody else. I think that Wes, our animator, did such a good job on that animation that it has made that character class 3 times as appealing as all of the others. So we're gonna have to step up the game with the non-fighter classes, I think.
It looks like an incredibly charming game. Is there a reason that you've gone for the stick figure art style?
Definitely a stylistic choice. In the very beginning, when I started Kingdom of Loathing, it was just me, and so I had to. I knew just enough about programming and was just good enough of a writer and system administrator to be able to build the web application. And the art was just, it was just programmer art basically, but people liked it enough that I kept doing it. And so it went from a necessity to a stylistic choice over time.
What about the actual gameplay when you're playing West of Loathing? You've mentioned side quests that you can do, but what's the fundamental aspects? How do you approach combat or persuasion if you've got that?
A lot of us on the team growing up really liked the Quest for Glory series from Sierra. And so we're sort of going for that kind of combination of adventure game and RPG. Like in that game, it was very much like a traditional, a Sierra, like a King's Quest or a Space Quest game. But in the beginning, you would pick a class and you had a lot of statistics and skills to level up. And those choices would determine what options were available to you for interacting with people in the world and solving puzzles and that kind of thing. We're going for that kind of hybrid. The way that interaction with objects and stuff and people in the world works is dialogue tree. It'll just pop up a conversation and you'll get a bunch of options for what to do or what to say. Some new options will be unlocked by stats, by things that you've done before, by other attributes of the character and other choices that you've made. And then in combat, we're trying to go for a similar style of just fairly simplistic, fairly small numbers, turn-based combat, the way that Kingdom of Loathing works, but we've been long frustrated by the constraints that we have to work under in that system, such as there only being able to be one enemy. So essentially, there's a team on your side of the battlefield and a team on the other side of the battlefield. You all get to move. The player is the only actor that can sort of do more than one thing in a turn. So you've got some resource management with action points there. A lot of people have compared it visually, at least, to Mega Man Battle Network, where positioning matters a little bit. I don't think it doesn't matter quite as much as it does in those games, as I understand it. But there will be things like, this attack damages everyone in this row or everyone in this column. The idea is for there to be enough things in the environment of combats that you can interact with that we can get some systemic stuff going on, a little bit of emergent things like you'll get the ability to like set things on fire, and maybe certain things, if you set them on fire, they'll explode and damage everyone that's nearby. Or, if you shoot the water tower, you can make some water leak on everything and put out everything that's on fire, that kind of thing. So it's turn-based, but with the opportunity for some tactical complexity in terms of the combat.
You briefly mentioned before the abilities. How does that tie in? Is it on a level up basis, or is it when you complete certain objectives or side quests?
Well, you start out with a few skills based on your choice of class, and you gain experience points by doing things both in and out of combat. I don't know precisely what to compare it to. We tried to avoid in Kingdom of Loathing for a long time the character having a level, but the players just sort of wouldn't accept it, so we just made up something that was level, and that was just a reflection of some of your other stats. But basically, you can level up individual statistics using XP. You can level up individual combat or non-combat skills using XP. So you kind of decide what you want the character to focus on. The way that you'll acquire new skills, I very much want to leave it this way if it works, is by actually finding things in the world that will teach you those skills, because that has always made a lot more sense narratively to me than, I killed enough skeletons, now I suddenly know a new trick.
Kung Fu.
Yeah. So as of right now, we're planning on just having, maybe people in the world that if you're a cowpuncher, they'll teach you the next cowpuncher skill once you find them. And then, maybe you've saved up some of your experience points to be able to level it up right away, or maybe you've used some of it to give yourself more hit points because you were losing fights earlier in the game, or whatever.
And similarly, there are ways to acquire additional perks out in the world beyond just the sort of, alignment ones that Zach mentioned earlier, like languages that you can learn and that kind of thing that influence how you can interact with the game.
Okay, could we go into the interaction in a bit more detail? How would, say, learning another language actually impact the gameplay?
Well, it could turn, if there was, say, a camp of goblins out in the world, that you'd normally approach it and just think of it as another thing where you were supposed to fight them all and clean it out. But maybe if you learn to talk to them, that camp would be a little quest hub for you instead of just a nest of enemies.
The gameplay would sort of fork depending on your abilities. You can either go in and wipe them out like you would any other side quest, or actually pick up additional quests from them.
Yeah, very, very much so. And really, almost everything, in an ideal world, almost everything that you do of any real consequence in the world would be forkable, as you've said, based on the choices that you've made, or which class you are, or what abilities you have. It is important to me to support a play style where you never have to fight anything if you don't want to. You have to make the right choices in order to do that, but there's sort of a way, starting out of the prologue, to play through the entire game without ever having to do any combat if you don't want to do any combat. And so we need to make sure that on a micro level, there are ways for your choices to matter in fundamental ways in terms of how the gameplay presents itself to you.
And is West of Loathing going to have the same New Game Plus style as Kingdom?
I don't think so. In its current state, there are like sort of silly things that you can unlock that are sort of little visual and aesthetic mutators that you can apply to it that will continue across characters. We'll kind of have to see. I think we have to see once it's all done and we get some like full playthrough play testing, what would make it interesting, because I think there's always the danger that when you're going for making something replayable, there are going to be parts of it that are always the same. And so we kind of have to see where those pain points are and then figure out what we want to let you carry across to minimize that. Those plans are currently pretty much in flux.
Is there a strong or even a loose multiplayer aspect to West of Loathing?
None that we've decided on so far. We've tossed around the idea of not the kind of multiplayer from Dark Souls that you think about, but more the kind where you leave messages for people. We've been discussing ways in which we might be able to put in anything where it's like, well, if some other player has lost a combat here, maybe there's a tombstone with their name on it when you get there in your version of the game. But anything that we do along those lines will be pretty minor. That is a thing that we're thinking of is only worth doing insofar as it's funny or entertaining or interesting or makes the world feel more developed. But yeah, as it stands now, it's like very much traditional single player game.
Yeah, we don't have any plans to do like head-to-head.
Do you have a preliminary release date for the full game?
We're looking at trying to have it just feature complete in the polished stages by the end of this year for a release early 2017. Yeah, so head on over to our Greenlight page and give us a yes vote if you can. You can find that at westofloathing.com/greenlight. If you just go to westofloathing.com, you can see the latest news. You can sign up for our newsletter, and you can keep abreast of what's going on with the game.
If you like this interview and want to see more, make sure you like and subscribe, and make sure to check back regularly for new content. I've been Scott Davidson, and this is a Mouse and Joypad original.